Good evening, everyone, and welcome to History Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina for the first talk in a row as part of the opening weekend of solo museum debut of Sebas Velasco, titled "The Morning Will Change Everything." It is a pleasure to welcome you here and to say hello. My name is Adna. And I am a visual artist, curator, and co-founder of Gallery Manifesto, which had the privilege and honor to be a partner of this amazing project, and which also had the opportunity to co-curate this talks program. So the talk that we will have tonight is titled "Representation: Finding the Warmth in Gray," which is a bit of a metaphorical title. It can mean a lot of things. And before we start to unfold all the whys and hows behind not only this title and the topics of our conversation, I would like to introduce our speakers for tonight. Well-known artist and figure, Sebas Velasco.
Hello.
Again, taking the stage, since last night we had a beautiful conversation with Sebas and Mario Ilic and Doug from Fifth Wall on the movie that was presented as part of the exhibition. And also privileged to introduce Marc Casals, a writer. Writer, translator from Bosnian, Serbian, Croatian to Spanish, journalist who was reporting on Bosnia for a decade, almost. That being said, I mean, we could have done this conversation in Bosnian, since Sebas is also fluent. But we are talking in English, so I will just like to use this opportunity to greet them in local manner. Dobrodošli, drugovi. And now we can start actually developing everything. So Manifesto was invited, and thanks to Charlotte Piat, given the opportunity to design and curate sort of this talks program, which had the idea of giving a somehow different narratives to this exhibition and to the space and to all the meanings that come from setup of this exhibition in his History Museum, which also marks its 80th anniversary. And our idea was to present the practices and the attitudes of our speakers through this broader discussion on different perspectives of what cultural scene, contemporary art scene in Bosnia is, and what the meanings of this scene can have in this international space and international discussions. So having two Spanish artists, one dealing with images and one dealing with words, and also your backgrounds of Basque minority and Catalan background, there is this question that immediately pops in our mind. What are the reasons and how is it possible that you as artists with these different backgrounds are able to show and translate and transpose the experience of post-socialist space and post-Yugoslav spaces so vividly, but also one might say so accurately? So this idea of accurate transfer of these experiences was also somehow the initial reason why we decided to talk about this question of representation, which we know was the basic one and the most critical one for our theory in the past several decades. So we wanted to discuss how you can actually take your experiences and your viewpoints and your attitudes to transfer what is known as this post-socialist experience. So, and we know that the socialism and Yugoslavia have been perceived and represented in different ways, and somehow this conflicted attitudes towards not only Yugoslavia but also socialism itself have somehow painted what I would say is a dull image of the region, but also dull, and I can say it, superficial representation of what life in the region is. And both of your works, Sebas, you're in sense of visual art and painting, and Marc, yours in the sense of words and literature, they have contributed to the shifting perspectives towards this question. And that's why we wanted to somehow emphasize this difference in the perspective. And that's why we talked about the warmth in the gray, which is something that I can only thank you for, because you are the ones that are shifting the perspectives of what our life is and what our perspective is. And so I would like to start with that notion of the warmth in gray. We talked a lot about it, and you were quite critical when it comes to that warmth, notion of warmth, because you were questioning yourself, am I actually painting the warmth in the gray? But I would say yes, you paint the warmth in gray. And if we take a look at your paintings, in most of the cases, we have the images of brutalist architecture. But this grayness of these concrete blocks, which is the reason why you are often called the painter of concrete utopia, they're somehow broken. This grayness is broken with these really strong highlights of red and yellow and orange. So do you consider this highlights and the color and the light that you use in your painting as this visual metaphor of the warmth in the gray of the region? Do you actually see the warmth, and where?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Adna, for this beautiful words and introduction. And just to mention, when you were saying like the Basque minority, this in my case would be already problematic, because I am from Burgos, which is a city in the north of Spain, which is not part of the Basque country, and my mom is from San Sebastian, which is the Basque country. She's a Basque speaker, and I am a Basque speaker as well. My dad is from another place called Valladolid, which is like very Spanish, if you like. And I never thought so much about it, but with the years I realized that maybe it's true that, like, being a different situation, former Yugoslavia and Basque country, Spain, when it comes to identity, it's true that in my life this question of identity was something that was always present in my life, and somehow I felt a little bit identified with what the mixed marriages were in Yugoslavia, obviously with the obvious distance in between the two realities. But in that sense, I do think that maybe that is not that it made that I have that it's easier to understand the complex reality of this region, but maybe I do have some sensibility towards the topic. And when I realized that Marc is actually Catalan, and it's also a kind of a special identity situation of Catalonia, and maybe it's true that for many of us Spanish people who are attracted to this part of the world, maybe there is some certain connection. So I would like to hear how Marc feels about this question. And going more towards the painting and what you were saying about the warmth in the gray, what I can tell, trying to be as honest as possible, is like the first impulse that I have to introduce the bright colors in the more cold or gray surfaces is something that that comes from your interior, like as a painter, as something very unconscious. So it's not that you sit and think, I have this cold image, and I'm gonna find a way to make it warm by doing this, and therefore the image of this place will be warmer, thanks, because that's not the reality of the way it comes. So it's a more unconscious process. But then when I look to the paintings, it's true that in a lot of them there are these warm lights and saturated colors that make a contrast with the other more gray spaces or cold spaces. And even though I say that the reason for this comes from a very painterly and unconscious impulse, maybe indeed there is something else, and there is this intention of or that I do find some warmth around the coldness. But as you say, for me it was kind of a conflict, because you presented it as in a very nice and polite way, but I wouldn't be surprised also if for some people, like I'm not warm in the gray, but even like underlining the grayness or something, and I feel ready to live with that feeling. But it's true that also during these days I had so many people commenting that they, after watching the paintings, they even look to their neighborhoods in a different way and in a nicer way. So I guess there is a little bit of both, and I think it's a very interesting topic. When I want to be calm, I say to myself that I'm not trying to define or to give a specific image of any region, but more to put in a painting some emotions and some feelings, and therefore I don't have to feel responsible for the paintings, but I do have to live with this kind of conflicts, and in the same sense I also wonder about how Marc feels about this when it comes to his writing especially, and how you as a local see the foreigners when they deal with your homeland, which you did already.
I personally already told you.
I know.
Because the reason why I adore your work and appreciate it so much, because I believe it brings a different image of what Sarajevo is, of what Belgrade is. Because these red lights in this grayness are somehow, I see them as signals of life. Mm-hmm. I see them as something really bright, something really warm, something that somehow is in complete contrast with this grayness, but also serves as this small hole that we often miss to look through, you know. We have these narratives that are really dominant and that usually are taken quite easily without scratching really the surface. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why it was important for us to talk about representation, because we all know that post-socialist spaces are often, connected and seen through this idea of squatting Slavs, this idea of pickles and, pickled cabbage and, these gray neighborhoods or devastated communities. So it's wonderful to have this image of one city that's also presenting the history and presenting the complexities of society, but also giving certain sense of hope. That's why I believe the decision to title the exhibition "The Morning Will Change Everything," citing the Indexi song, is quite a wonderful choice. And I've been asked about it. Like people ask me why is the exhibition titled "The Morning Will Change Everything," and my answer to that was because there's some hope in it, and what gives us hope is the morning that might change it all. So Marc, how do you feel about it? I mean, you've been traveling around the region, but you were also, as a journalist, reporting about Bosnia and Herzegovina, and as a what we can say, as a result of this experiences, you wrote a book, "The Stone Remains," and you represented your friends and their personal narratives, their personal histories, and through this lens, you shaped this written representation of the warmth, if we can say. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that? How do you see the warmth in this grayness of brutalist architecture and post-Yugoslav space?
First of all, thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks for inviting me and to this exhibition. Sebas, who's a great painter. As you can see, his paintings speak from themselves, but also a great friend, a great person, which is very important. I decided to write mainly about the people because that was the warmest thing for me in Bosnia. When I was here for the first time in 2005. So I was traveling around the former Yugoslavia, and I was obviously struck by the landscape, the cities. I was quite impressed with everything, but I was especially impressed by the people, by I think Bosnians are not always very kind to each other, but they're quite kind to foreigners. So I got this feeling of warmness and this some kind of delicate treatment, and I was fascinated with that from the first moment. And then in 2010 I moved here, and I spent 10 years in Sarajevo. So at a certain point, I thought to myself, you speak the language, you have some knowledge about the country, you've traveled around, you know people, why don't you write a book? And for me, it was the people first and foremost. It was not a question of, I don't like this in general, these books about the Balkans or about any part of the world where a foreigner, because you have to reflect on these things these days. Since the rise of cultural studies, you can't ignore that your position, like what culture do you belong to, it's all these hierarchies of power and knowledge. So I was thinking, how can you write a book about Bosnia that makes sense for the Spanish readers and for Bosnia? So I decided from the beginning to kind of take a step back and put people on the forefront. So I sat down, I wrote down a list of people whose stories were interesting, because I think everybody likes an interesting story with an interesting character, and through which I could tell things about Bosnia. And in this sense, like changing a little bit. It's this grim, gray, dull image and giving it some worth. But for me, it was people first and foremost from the beginning to the end of the book. And it still is in my life.
And what's interesting in this conversation, what was really somehow important for me is that we have different media perspectives. We have Sebas as a painter, and you paint the images of what the post-socialist region is, and you write the narratives, you write the characters. But somehow both of you managed to convey the complexities of the history. If they're not something that is purposefully done, not necessarily, but if one takes a closer look, it's there. So in Marc's sense, in your case, that's much more visible because your book is actually writing the history of Bosnia and Herzegovina through personal perspectives. But in Sebas' paintings, we have this collage of the spaces and people and moments, because you do collage as one part of your process. So can you tell us more about these connections that happen in the meantime, like connections of the space and time, connections of personal stories, how these experiences of the travels and the research that you do, how do they affect your work in the final phase? Mm-hmm. How much does it, for example, one scene that gets saved in your memory, but you don't have it necessarily in the photo. You don't have it necessarily in the collage. How is memory really lasting in your case throughout the work process?
Mm-hmm. So yes, you say maybe in my case, this relationship to people and local people is is more indirect or more indirect. But I would say, like, from the first trips I did here, like it's also the people what lead me to stay. I started like making friends in the graffiti scene. So from the first moment I was painting with maybe local graffiti writers in some places, and those same people were the ones who were coming with me to show me their neighborhoods, or not only in Bosnia but also in Belgrade or in Rijeka, and in that sense I think that left a mark, and that left something also in the way I paint. And I think if I had done that on my own, or if this was the same interest in landscape, but I had to do that alone, or I hadn't had this straight and deep and love connection with the people, I do think that the work would be totally different. So in that sense, it's more indirect and mysterious, but I think it's there. And then on a more general level, it's true that when you paint something which is not a portrait, the people is less evident, or you are speaking less about the people. But a landscape, an urban landscape especially, always speaks about the people and about the mark and the traces that the people left in those buildings, or in those parks, or in those cars that they drove, or in the way they decorate their houses, and therefore what light they have at night, depending on how they are. So in that sense, I do think they tell the stories of the people and speak about the people, but in a more subtle way, perhaps.
Poetic way, maybe.
Yeah, poetic sounds good. So yeah.
Marc?
There's this book by the French writer Georges Perec, and he writes about the building in Paris. Yes, and he's going flat by flat, describing the whole apartment and telling the stories of people inside, which sometimes when I watch Sebas paintings, I think about it. Like you have some stories there. What's happening inside this all these paintings. Also, I was quite impressed because his Sebas, I think, is more about landscapes, more about the urban landscapes. Also, he's also a great painter of rural landscapes, but you kind of don't feel the urge to paint those kind of things. And
you paint portraits. You write them. Sebas
Yes.
paints the portraits and you write them.
Yes, yes. I was the most important thing to me. Not even the writing. It's the same process to me. Like the relationships with all these people, you have to spend time together with them. You have to get to know them. You have to look at them. You have to try to get the way they think about things, the way they see life. And it's the whole process is very interesting. Like the writing part is okay. I like it. I enjoy it, especially if it flows, if words come to your mind and to your fingers. But the whole relationship process you create with this is very, very interesting. And in the end, it's what pays for me. And it's what gives me this kind of warm feeling that you're doing something with the people. I don't consider that I write the stories. I try not to write in hierarchically, like Bosnia is like this, Bosnia is like that, this person is like this person is like that, because they're telling me their stories. So I'm retelling them. So they're, in a sense, they're they're also the narrators of the stories. I just pick up their voice. I add some of, obviously the gaze is mine. The words are mine. Sometimes the words are almost literally the words they have used when they were telling me their story. So it's a kind of co-creation. And in the end, what I try to do is like to put all these people on focus, on the forefront, because it's what's important. They're much more interesting to me than myself, and also it's something that stays. What happened with this book, all these stories, like the book came out in 2021, some years have passed, and some of these people are not anymore with us. They have died. There was, I don't know, I remember now, David Kamp, who was Hassan, he was sort of a priest in the synagogue. He was one of the last, he was a Sephardic Jew. He was one of the last Ladino speakers in Sarajevo. Also Marc Casals, who was an artist who learned the Bosnian traditional crafts, which are still practiced in Churchia, and brought them to a different level, an artistic level. Or Alma Burina, who was a singer. If you went to Svono, you probably have heard her sing. And they're not here anymore, but these stories remain. Thanks to language, there's something of them that will remain a little longer, which I think is important. And makes the world a place which is a little warmer for everybody.
I like how you said that since we were talking about the representation of someone's experience, personal life, someone's tradition, culture, you explained it as in a sense of co-creation. But what we also talked about is that it's a certain process of translation. So you translate one experience and you from one context into another context, foreign context, which is why this notion of ethics is somehow always present in this conversation and any other conversation on the similar topic. And there is this one book by Maša Dabić. It's called Friction Losses, and she explains actually our inability to translate someone's experience in a foreign language, in a foreign context, because some of those really important things, some of the details are simply impossible to translate, so they get lost. But also, what we can say is that in those friction losses, as she calls them, we have an open space for some other things to emerge. And I would say that in both Sebas's practice and Marc, your writing, those friction losses are actually what opens the international audience to these beautiful things that the local region has and that are almost invisible and untranslatable even for the locals. So some of those things that are overseen in the local context and somehow become more visible when they are brought to the international context. So where do you see those friction losses? Where do you see those, if we can consider them in that sense, the open spaces for finding the warmth in gray?
I think there is an obvious thing that happens to the foreign people that is interested in one foreign country, and is that the way they look to the landscape or to the people is different to the one of a local person, because the local person is just too used to it. So it could be that in my case, what for many locals is not calling their attention because it's just everyday life, maybe for my eyes gets like some kind of magical, otherworldly, special connotation. And I think that has to do a lot with the fact that I don't see it every day. Maybe Benio, when he was in San Sebastian, paid attention to stuff that I don't pay attention to, and I think that's something that that happens very, very often, and it's pretty natural. But yeah. I don't know if it happens to Marc if the way you or the attention you pay to the people and to the stories of the people, like if the fact that you are not local makes your curiosity find stuff that other wouldn't find. Yeah. You mentioned sometimes that the people feel comfortable talking to you.
Yes. Yeah, there's this position of the foreigner who speaks the language, and so it's I've felt this many times because they can express themselves. I understand everything. I can answer whatever. So, but at the same time, since I don't belong to the culture, I'm not judgmental. And Bosnian culture can be quite judgmental sometimes. And so this was a privileged position which helped me a lot during the writing of the book, as you know. But also, I don't know. It's very. You're dealing with human communication. These things will always be imperfect. There's always losses, misunderstandings. For instance, culturally, for me, the Bosnia or the Balkans in general, I would say even Eastern Europe, is not very well known in Spain. It's known through stereotypes and just only a few of them. And in this case, in the case of Bosnia, I don't think even the main stereotype is socialism, but war. So what you try to do is kind of just not working the gray. It's a kind of light in the dark, in the sense that these terrible, dark, primitive Balkans are a place where people live, which are quite nice, at least to foreigners, and that have their culture. I don't make any difference between what I write or what I translate, in the sense that I try just to widen the horizons to see that you have your own culture, your own writers who have their own vision of the world, their own ways of telling things. And it's a unique case. And I believe there's a space between cultures, which is what I think where I try to act, and Sebas too. You can tell us, which all this common territory, all this crossing of subjectivities, that territories is where things which are interesting and creative and productive can happen.
Sebas, what do you think? How do you see those territories of subjectivity and creativity? Since you've been traveling for 10 years, there is a question of what keeps you coming back all the time? Because each time you come, you're more familiar with those subjectivities and spaces of creativity, and you are still looking at them with this curiosity that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. You didn't become Benio, who sees a building of, I don't know, CV Dom, and you still look at in the same way. You will always look at it in a different way, because that's something that's visible in your work. Mm-hmm. For 10 years, you've been producing amazing pieces that each one of them is evolving. There's not, you're not a person to get trapped in this mannerism. You're evolving as a painter, as a person. So where do you find this curiosity?
I have to say that this process has changed, and these feelings has changed over the years. And the other day I was answering some questions to Doug, and he asked me how did it change, and I explained him that during the first trips, 9 years ago, I have this pure curiosity, which was like a fascination, and only if I was coming by car or by plane, only approaching Bosnia or whatever, or former Yugoslavia, made me all nervous, all excited. And I even remember once in your balcony in Rijeka that I could see the sea, and I was thinking, oh, there's like the Adriatic and the whole Croatia, and behind there is Bosnia, and further away, Serbia, and I was feeling like it was like a little bit naive, but I had more this kind of very pure childish feelings. And with the time, maybe that got a little down because I came like so many times or quite often, so this hair doesn't go so up so quickly. But at the same time, maybe by knowing more of you, making more friends, starting to understand more the language or trying to speak it a little, to, I don't know, to have a more and deeper, intense relationship, I lost that, but I gained a lot more. And that was just like, man, that sounds just like a romantic relationship. Like where it's like, oh, so maybe now I really got married to Bosnia or something. No, but I think it's pretty accurate. It's a little bit like that. That's the way it has evolved over the years.
And how would you explain the change in the representation of the landscapes in your paintings?
Wow,
so you explained how your personal attitude and feelings have changed over the past 10 years, but what are the most visible traces of the change that we can see in the paintings?
It's a tough one, but like taking a look to the paintings, I remember that the ones I was doing like 7-8 years ago, like I was attracted to a lot of the same topics, but I was so obsessed also about the history and or more political questions that I was even taking references from old pictures, like maybe from some pioneer that a friend gave me, like an analog photo, and tried to work from those. Like somehow I was trying to absorb the history through painting it, and the paintings were fine, but I feel like maybe they were not as mine as the last ones, because in the last ones maybe I took the elements that really I get to interiorize, and not so much those driven by this more naive curiosity. So somehow, it doesn't sound so good, but I would say that maybe they became a little bit more authentic, the last paintings with the time. Yeah.
Marc, how has your writing, since you're a translator but you also write, how has your approach to language and to these narrative forms changed over the time?
I also, like Sebas, have lost this thrill of the discovery, but it's a law of nature. It can happen when you discover things. During the writing of the book, there was a whole process of how do you write about a foreign country, about a foreign culture, how you describe these landscapes, which don't resemble, like I am from Catalonia, so they don't resemble, landscapes in Bosnia don't resemble Catalan landscapes. So there was a whole process of study of reading Spanish literature, which dealt with other regions of Spain, which have more similar landscapes or culture. I read a lot of literature about Galicia, for instance, about the Basque Country, because the Basque Country is also like central Bosnia. It has it's very hilly. It has deep valleys, fogs, etc., etc. So I was working a lot, and I was studying, just probably as you study painters, I was studying writers, just to have a palette, like to have the tools to describe these landscapes and to describe this world. And also the fact of translating writers is a very useful exercise for this. Technique is a very ugly word for when you deal with things, but let's say I have translated the Sarajevo writer Dario Zamonja, And it's easier for me to write about Sarajevo because I have, during this process of translation, I have given a lot of thought about how to describe certain things like, I don't know, Akafana, because he spent quite a lot of time in those places. Or I have translated Ivo Andrić, so when I have to when I have to write about the Bosnian landscape, it's easier for me. Or also, it's very one thing which is quite difficult for us is like to give this Oriental. I know the concept is controversial, but I think you'll understand, to give this Oriental touch to a text. If you have translated Ivo Andrić, you have this color in your palette, so and you can use it. So now it's not. First, it was like all thrill or passion. Now it's not. It's not so naive, but the passion still is there. Just like in a relationship, it settles down a little bit, but there are still some flames. So.
It's interesting how how it's possible for you to learn from the language itself and from the literature, and find those tools, as you mentioned, to translate again the experiences. Well, Sebas doesn't need a second image, so it's also this intermediate concept of translating from reality to photography, from photography to photo collage, and then from the collage to the painting. So how do you see this intermediate translation, Sebas? Does it really help you find the tools that Marc found in the literature of Jamonja and Andrić? What gives you the tools? I know that you're focused on light as a painter, and that photography as itself has been a tool for you. But in this translation from photography to the painting, how would you describe this process?
So, yeah, basically what I do is like to try to gather a lot of material in the form of photographic references. And that's a way of having a lot to pick from. And then when I'm in the studio and I'm watching the images and mixing them, it's like more of a process of how to say, like when you are cooking and you put the flour and you just want to get the pure material, like it's a process like that. And to make sure that when I go to the painting, what I'm gonna paint is the closest to the most emotional feeling that I had in person in that moment, and with everything else that influenced it in these emotions. And in that sense, it had been the time you spent here with the people, but even also the music you heard, or even the literature you read. And when you mention Jamonja, and when I wrote your translation of that book, some of the moments that he describes and you translate were kind of close to maybe sun atmospheres I would like to have in the painting. So in that sense, I think for me it has been very important that my experience is not only the one of traveling and making pictures, but to make a lot and then to have a lot of surrounding experiences that make the product more complex. And in that sense, I realized I got a commission to make a mural in Morocco, and I saw a lot of very, very interesting architecture, like a kind of strangely brutalist, and I did the photos, but then I just didn't felt it. And aesthetically, all the elements were there, but I realized that maybe everything around it has to also fit this feeling or this you need those other ingredients to make the good paella. I don't know.
So it seems like the warmth we were trying to find tonight is almost impossible to put in words, almost impossible to translate, only possible to be felt. So for all of those who are listening to us now, if you didn't manage to pinpoint it, if you didn't manage to read about it, then try to go into the streets of Sarajevo and try to experience it. Maybe that's where the real warmth is, I would say. Any questions?
Maybe I have a direct question to Marc.
You're welcome.
Just to break the silence.
Yes, just to break the silence and you can
10
relax
seconds of
and think on your good question. But he's always telling me, off the record, he tells me a lot like, man, see urban landscapes and Sarajevo, Belgrade, but why don't you put more, you said it more softly, but why don't you put more, or it would be cool if you also put a lot of attention to small villages. And I just was genuinely curious about when you had your project of the book and you, I guess, spending most of the time in Sarajevo, if you did a plan like, I'm going to spend try to be, I don't know, weeks in the road, or how did you manage to get to the more rural spaces to know them better enough, or if it was something you had to think about since maybe you were living in Sarajevo, or if in Sarajevo you met enough people that maybe were from the villages, or how was this process in your case?
I met some of these people I knew before I even decided to write the book, so it was, I had been going to these villages for years just to hang out with them because I liked hanging out with them. There's a case, for instance, there's a little village in Romania which is called Herzegovina. It's near Sokola. You wouldn't even arrive. It's like a very remote village. And just a Catalan friend of mine married a guy from there, and that's why I know the place. And but you can't even get there. And also. I think it's, we haven't talked about this. It's, I've also given a lot of thought about which voices to amplify. Who do you give voice to? And of course, like you have lots of foreigners writing about Bosnia or the Balkans in very superficial way, or even then they tend, especially journalists, they come here, they want to write a piece, and they talk like this is thing is to talk to the intellectual class in Sarajevo because they speak languages, because they have contacts, or you have a fixer who tell you have to speak to this guy. So because I speak the language, I wanted to take advantage of this position just to give voice, amplify the voices of more anonymous people who you wouldn't notice them, especially if they're from the country, because in Bosnia you have this, as in the whole Balkans, you have this whole division between the city and the country. So, this thing was very important to me, and also the book was not Sarajevo-centric. I like urban landscapes, and I love Sarajevo. It's for me, every time I come here, actually, I don't like to think about Sarajevo when I'm outside Sarajevo, because it's
you get emotional.
And it's not good for my present life. So, but I wanted the book to be about Romania or Krajina, or I don't know, there's a story in Trebinje, there's a story in some village around Prijedor. I wanted to depict the whole of Bosnia, and I think the language gives you that. And that was very important for me. But now I think I was thinking. Yesterday I was watching the paintings. I was thinking that I haven't described that much these landscapes that you paint. So I'll put it on my to-do list. Yes.
I have to go to Prijedor and you have to go to Otoka.
Okay.
Any questions?
I can ask a question. I was wondering, now that you were saying this, is it maybe possible that you're feeling this warmth in people in general lifestyle, maybe because of the harshness of the environment, whether it's architecture, whether it's it's hard to disconnect from knowing a little bit of the past of the region, of the city in particular. Did it ever occur to you that maybe that's emphasizing seeing the humanity more intensively? If you were observing some other place in the world, maybe you wouldn't notice it so much because you don't have the weight of the surrounding and the history. Was this ever something that you thought of? Either of you, Marc or Sebas?
I think people is genuinely warm because Germany has a very cold landscape and architecture and weather.
And history.
Any Germans in the room?
As you know, you're from Rijeka. You know, people here are famous for their hospitality. So I was watching the paintings yesterday. I was thinking like all of these warm lights Sebas paints, and I was imagining like the welcome you get in any one of these apartments. You know, you'll get some food, you'll get some drink. Hopefully, you'll get some pita. You'll get some raki, and then it gets even warmer. And and I think it's something separated from the rough and difficult history of the place, but maybe because of this background, maybe you perceive it a little more. But I don't know, neither Sebas nor I know Bosnia before the war, so we can tell how it was before. But it's like I think all these human relationships here, at least for me, have been genuinely warm and spontaneously warm.
I would maybe say that they are warm. If we say that Bosnians are warm, maybe in that context it would be that they are warm in spite of history and the aesthetics of the spaces.
Which is something to praise, because you can become sour.
But we can also be critical about that, because I wouldn't necessarily say that Bosnians are warm.
Mm-hmm. I told you before, to foreigners, to each other. You know yourself better.
I've had some bad experiences. So, but you know, it's the way that Sebas is critical about his paintings, painting the warmth in gray. I have to be critical about that perception of Bosnians as warm, because we can have really.
Yes, no, I totally agree. I've seen it with my Bosnian friends. I haven't received any of that, but it's true that
you witnessed some things.
Yes, but from the side. So.
Any other questions?
I can do another one.
Yeah. Please do.
No, for Sebas, the question. I think we actually probably mentioned this before, but I'm always, when I'm looking at your work, I'm wondering how difficult it is to set up the painting, to decide what you're going to paint, and never to have an action in it.
And never to have an
action in it. You're never showing something happening. Like there's something in the snow. But
this one here, something is going on.
Like that, but there's no activity, there's no barbecuing, there's no smoke or coffee, there's no, it's such, portraits are just mute standing, it's frontal, but if they're in a cityscape, they're usually just standing, maybe moving away on the phone, but there's no action in some sort.
I would say that it's because if there is a little bit this lack of action, this lack of people crying or laughing or jumping, or maybe the story for the viewer gets a little bit longer, whether if there was something very actionally, that doesn't exist, no? Like something very strange or happy or sad or something happening, you stuck there, and it's harder to stay flying around the painting. And I think I tried that with the paintings. You can spend a while like around, and that the film is a little bit longer. And for instance, in that painting that you mentioned, in the first sketches, one of the figures was looking to the viewer, and in that sense, it was not that it was an action, but it was like less silent at that one. And it's when I decided to change the figure and have neither of the figures looking at you, but looking away or to the ground, that I started to like it more, because actually your eyes could circulate more around the painting and even pay attention to the action that the friend there mentions in the background, or even of the sound of the electric white street lamp in the background. And when there was a little bit more of action in the foreground, your brain doesn't allow himself to travel so much around the small streets of the painting, if you like.
And did it ever happen that you came across a scene, I don't know, this field where the car is, but then kids playing football or whatever, but then that's a no-go. You cannot paint that because it's an explicit action.
I used to
visually, I can imagine it work as a painting, but you always have this kind of muted environment.
Yeah. There was a time when I was doing paintings of people playing football, actually, and I quite liked them, and then I just naturally forgot. So maybe those are the last actions in my paintings, but maybe I certainly should think about it more. So thanks for the questions.
It wasn't as a suggestion.
No. But
I like it like this.
Yes.
I was wondering how conscious the process is.
Yes. It's pretty unconscious decisions, but that's why it's lovely to have this kind of events and conversations, because it makes you think more. Yes.
I might have one simple. How do you know when the painting is finished, and what is there in the painting that tells you, okay, now it's enough? Because certainly there are surfaces in the painting that somebody might say could be painted more, if you understand what I mean. And then there is this difference between the level of details, which adds up to everything. And another one, which is also easy to answer, is during the process, do you paint more of them at the same time, kind of parallelly, or it has to be full focus on one without thinking of what comes next?
I paint a few at the same time, and trying to respond the question, that's a difficult topic for a lot of painters. How especially figurative paintings, but also abstract ones, like how much attention pay to each part of the painting, because if you pay the same amount of attention to everybody in the painting, sometimes the painting is dead, like a little bit, like this thing I was saying, that your eyes cannot circulate anymore because you get stuck with a barrier. But also sometimes it's hard to have a very, very, very undone painting in some part and something very well explained. So it's a difficult balance. But in general, I like the paintings to have these different stages, because in general, I love to pay attention to the things that talk about the pass of time and the movement of life, or the footprints that the human leaves in the objects. That's why I like more like a kind of old house than a super new brand house, or an older car than a brand new clean car, because it has a bigger power to tell stories. And in that sense, I like when a painting is telling the story of its own existence by the different stages, because if you have one layer, which was the first one you did, and you see that one in this thing in the left, you see the first moments of that painting in that one, but you still see others which were like in the middle, and then how you did the sky four times because you didn't like it, and then some drops fell down. So all those elements that one could say that they are dirty or undone or something, for me, they are telling the story of the painting itself, the same as something which is a little bit rotten in a car, or something that is a little bit broken in a facade is telling the story of the building or the car or the object.
And what happens if you overdo it by intentionally? Does it happen that you come into some sort of trance and then you go out, wow, too much?
Yes. I have a couple of those hidden in the studio, and I am trying to do something because it happened to me. Yeah. I wonder to what extent this can happen to a story where you say like you tell too much or you were too specific, and you had to leave more room for something more undone. Can you do that with words?
I'm not very talkative, so I normally don't tell too much. But what I do, for instance, with the book, because it's like 16 stories, and you have like stories from all over Bosnia, and I try to depict, let's say, all the diversity of Bosnia, obviously nationally, but also class diversity and geographically, like the stories from Sarajevo, Mostar, Bihać, Prijedor, Banja Luka. Because you have so many conflicting narratives in Bosnia, instead of you getting kind of a mosaic or a puzzle where all the pieces fit, I try to leave some rough edges, because that's what you get. You're in a village or in a city or with a person, and you're talking about a certain topic, and then you go to the next village or you talk to the next person, and the whole narrative changes and the whole perspective changes. So I try to leave it like that, because it was more important for me. Obviously, I have my opinions about this, but I try to take a step back and leave these rough edges for people to get for Spanish people to get this experience you get in Bosnia, that you have lots of perspectives which don't necessarily fit. Not very often. They don't fit very often, actually. But
Super.
Any other questions?
Maybe no.
Thank you all for listening, for your questions, insights, and you're welcome to stay for a performance by Jaime Velasco, Spanish guitar maestro, and hopefully you'll join us for the rest of the night and enjoy. Thank you.
Good night.